and that you're being recognized for participating in this event for the past year. It's the very first step. You've already taken it. I mean, when you engage in these things and show up every day and put the work in, what you realize is it's totally worth it. And your opportunities grow from there. And I was asked to come and talk about my background for sure, which I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on. But the other part of it is just trying to reinforce the amazing science that can be done by just about anybody. So my background, I'm just a kid from New Jersey. And I was you 35, 40 years ago, depending on what age you are, and you can do the math, and didn't know what my future was really gonna be. But I wanted to work in medicine. In some way, shape, or form, I wanted to be there and help people. I couldn't really decide, go to medical school or become a researcher, and maybe I didn't even really understand the difference when I was in high school. But I had a lot of people around me who were very inspirational, who worked in healthcare, who worked in education, who actually, my parents were both part of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. So, and I ended up with two brothers in the Air Force. So aviation and the world of potentially aerospace was kind of in my zone, right? It was familiar to me and it was exciting to me, and I just needed to figure out how to be a part of it. But the space part came later. That was through one of these ways that I could not have predicted, which is just another aspect of, as you do your education and the different jobs you're gonna do, just keep your eyes open for opportunity and remain curious. So of course I did a bachelor's degree at a very small state school. I did a biology major, a chemistry minor, but I was always interested in performance. I did a lot of stuff teaching aerobics for a while, working in gyms, and understand how the human body developed and how I could change it, including my own. And then I had to make some choices about what I was gonna do with my life, because at some point, as you're getting your bachelor's degree and moving on, maybe your parents start asking some questions of, when are you gonna go to work? And what kind of job are you gonna have? And is that degree gonna support you in the future? And I was like, I hope so. And I also, just to introduce you, my husband comes with me. He's been my support network for 40 years. We met in high school, which is not a usual story, and we've been together ever since. So there are people around you that create that support network that sometimes 40 years later, you still show up for each other. And they are important to have. And it's also an important part of life to be present and enjoy what you're doing along the way. Because obviously, you're all hard workers. Most people I meet, especially at Johnson Space Area Headquarters, like type 1 personality, where go, 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 we want to accomplish things. And you can get a little lost in the doing sometimes and not appreciate where you are. And I will tell you, as I commented and was thinking about the number of years between 35 and 40, I was like, wow, that went by fast. So sometimes it's worth just taking a pause, celebrating like this kind of award tonight, and appreciating what you've received and where you're going to take it from here. So bachelor's degree, and then the decision was, it took me a couple years to figure out and make my way to Texas A&M. Can you imagine, from New Jersey to Texas A&M College Station? That was quite the move, but they have a really amazing programs and opportunities, and that's where I was in the medical college and had the blend of both understanding medicine and being actually in medical school for 2 years parallel to the med students, while I went off and did research in a laboratory and had to find my passion in terms of combining medicine, exercise, and the idea of extreme exposures. So it really worked out well when you find these different institutions that have really robust programs, that you have exciting opportunities as a student, that you don't have to worry about, exactly how this is going to play out in a career path. You just get to experience it for a couple more years. But when you do go to graduate school, you are having to produce something in the end, most likely papers, because that's in academia kind of a standard of what you're looking for, but also solutions, because those papers should contain things that are meaningful to someone else. And in my case, I like things that are very applied. So it was like the American Heart Association and cardiologists who would be very interested in the work that I was doing in the lab. Not that it was directly applicable to medicine in 1999 or 2004 or whatever year, but it had potential for the future to inform how doctors decades from that time would be doing medicine. And actually, some of the papers I was involved in and not only authored now affect the way we do medicine and with how we use a thing called growth factors. And it's really gratifying to see some contribution I made in medicine of today. I can stand back and say, I was a part of that. And a lot of what we do, especially in the space program, is I didn't do it by myself, we did it. but I was a part of that and very proud of it. It was during graduate school that I had an opportunity to have a committee member, and this is where it's called serendipity. I don't think you could have planned this. This wasn't part of a 5 or a 10-year plan to have somebody on my committee who ended up with a grant from the space biology group, who isn't here at Johnson Space Center, have an experiment on a NASA shuttle program. And at that point, I was graduating, I was doing a postdoc, so I had a higher level of responsibilities. This is where I wasn't just in the lab being a student or a technician, but I was responsible for about a dozen people coordinating an effort of doing experiments and also getting ready for animals to return from a flight. But I would tell you, it was a very profound experience because I lived out at Kennedy Space Center and worked in the laboratories there, setting up and being ready for animals to come back. But we were part of Columbia 107. And we were there at the landing pad the day it didn't return. And we were actually in the grandstands next to the families who were awaiting the arrival of their family. And while it was a tragedy, it was amazing to watch what happened and how people behaved in the face of tragedy, and how we dedicated ourselves to learning from what happened and doing better and applying it not only for the space program, but for the families and the recognition that those who lost their lives, but the sacrifice that a lot of people make to be part of the space program. So that's when I started looking for a job at NASA and understood potentially the role I could play in the team effort that is the spaceflight program. So that's how I arrived at Johnson Space Center. I also always believed that the reason we do spaceflight is to learn and bring stuff back to Earth. You hear a lot about the Apollo program. They're amazing return on investment, that's what we call it, right? What we put into these programs pays us back thousands-fold. The idea of the supercomputers we carry around in our pockets nowadays was born from the idea of pushing the limits of communication and computational power that was needed to get us to the moon the first time. Those are the shoulders we stand on with those types of capabilities. And it could be people like you that are doing it for the next Mars mission or whatever mission after that, that create the foundation for these huge achievements that change the way we do stuff here on Earth. Throughout my career now, since I've been at Johnson Space Center over 20 years, I started out when I came in as a scientist, but I worked in medical operations supporting the physicians who have to take care of the crew, decide how to keep them healthy while they're training to do a spaceflight mission, and then also deal with the way their body changes while they're in space. So there's a lot of what we call moving parts. There's a lot of variables that we start out with, because even people who never go to space get sick here on Earth. That's what we're accustomed to. Well, imagine having that complexity, but when you're in a low Earth orbit, 250 miles away, and we can't return you for days to weeks or whatever the complexity is. We played out in the last year, the logistics of getting a vehicle up and recovering people sometimes takes a while to sort it all out. And the human body can do a lot of interesting things over the course of time that maybe we couldn't predict or prevent, and we gotta be prepared to deal with it. But along the way, so I learned kind of the risk management side. I also came out of a laboratory, right? I no longer was the scientist at the bench side. I was now one of these people pushing information out to people in academia and industry and said, these are our problems. These are the things we can't solve. We need your help. And we do things like requests for proposals. We run research announcements, and we ask people for their great ideas. And it could be people like you. Even as citizen scientists now we pull on. It's called open science. We encourage people from all walks of life and all discipline to participate, because you never know where a good idea might come from. And I think, while I wasn't able to memorize it, there was a quote on China's opening slide that was very correct. We just don't know when, where, and how the next great idea is going to come from. But we have to be open to hearing it, and we got to be open to people we would have never predicted. You don't need a PhD to have a great idea. You're probably going to need some science background to make it happen and some engineer help along the way, which is why we partner with people. But the International Space Station has been an amazing place to experience space flight for 6 months, 8 months, 1 year at a time for some of these individuals. And they've allowed us to do a ton of work up there to learn solutions for the future. In my particular case, I still work on medical hardware, as you heard in the opening, and I'm very interested in medical capability that not only keeps people healthy, but prevents disease. And sometimes they can be the same thing, and sometimes they're slightly different. I also should comment, I use this slide just to create a spectrum of when we're moving from, and this isn't chronologic necessarily, but moving from low Earth orbit, NASA astronaut-driven work, all the way up through commercial space flight, which are smaller crews going out for shorter time periods, but the diversification of the type of people we're sending is changing pretty rapidly with commercial space. And that has added an interesting challenge, but also an interesting opportunity. And NASA has really, I think, opened its mind to using commercial space flight, knowing that there's a need for them to come in and take over low Earth orbit so that we can move on to the moon and Mars. But just by the type of people they fly, it has really opened up our ability to have even greater science, I think, than we've had previously. So the idea of doing exploration, we are really building new ecosystems. When folks talk about spaceflight, you often use the word vehicle. And vehicle, I think, typically we think of a plane or a car and we're going someplace and there's a finite amount of time, and when we're on that trip we can stop at Buc-ee's and get a variety of things we forgot to take with us, or get your favorite drink. And in spaceflight, if you didn't preconceive it, it's not going to magically be there. So in an exploration, that will be very true. Like in low Earth orbit, we can do resupply. So if the crew needs more stuff, we find a way to get it up there. It's becoming more challenging right now. We're gonna have kind of a lull in vehicle traffic, but there's just a lot of pre-planning that has to be done. And also, while the people are up there, they have to be satisfied with maybe going without the things that are their favorites for a while we try to do our very best. We can't always have everything up there. The other element is the crew will have to become more and more autonomous. And this actually conceptually needs to actually happen on Earth, which means they can't be dependent on mission control anymore. That when you're in the vehicle, when you're on the mission, you are self-contained and you have to solve your problems together with the set of resources we sent you with. And it's a really interesting problem. On the medical side, we actually call it the backpack problem. Everything you need to take has to fit essentially in the size of a backpack. And so you have to get super creative with thinking, if I can only fit 100 solutions in there, with those 100 solutions, could I solve 1,000 problems? When you think about all the permutations, if you could recombine the resources in there. And so these abstract ideas have to be made real. And we have to start down on Earth and saying, if we do these kinds of combinations, and we just give it to a team of people who maybe doesn't have the highest degree of training, or they have very different areas of expertise, but most of them are not medical, would they be able to figure it out? And part of the challenge is how we communicate with each other from different backgrounds, right? There's a really great video that runs on social media that is a dad with his kid, and the kid had to write the directions about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't know how many people have seen that. And what it demonstrates is how not good we are at giving directions to other people. The level at which we have to anticipate what the other person needs to know to execute the solution set. And so to me, it helps illustrate really clearly, like when we're telling someone who's not from our background or from our education, you really have to be empathetic to what that person needs to know to be successful. And that's how we have to think of the crew when we're designing these things that I try not to refer to as vehicles anymore, but not only is it an ecosystem, it's actually a mini exoplanet, right? Because there isn't a breathable atmosphere outside this vehicle. There isn't water if we don't start it. Like, we can recycle it, but how do you start a recycling? I saw some of the projects, I was like, it doesn't magically appear. You have to put it in first and put it in the loop. So essentially you're doing a water cycle, you're doing an air cycle, and now we have living people in there, we've got microbes in there, and we probably should add some plants to help round out the system. And how do you manage this ecosystem? Well, that is one of the challenges, because you have to keep it in the sphere you've built. So we start talking about moving forward with science and technology, engineering, math, all have to come into play. So for the medicine side, and in low Earth orbit, in the shuttle era even, one of our biggest tools to help diagnose people, because again, we're not going to fly an MRI, we're not going to fly a CAT scanner. You really have to think about doing more with less. And this is actually similar on Earth to remote populations, people near the Arctic Circle, the very north part of Canada, the natives who live up there. They're miles away, and often there are no roads you have to fly in. Sometimes it's iced over, and they may be, not accessible for months of the year. We actually deliberately put people in Antarctica to do just that. And we actually use those isolated, confined places as ways to understand, well, if we give them these tools and train them on it, and we actually use telemedicine, because we can use audio and video at times like we do on low Earth orbit, but sometimes we take part of those resources away so we can imagine what would it be like in the Mars mission scenario when we don't have good telecommunications. Can those people use these tools? So this is where you combine something you might be familiar with, which is ultrasound. Many people have had that used on them. It is a non-invasive tool, gets a picture of the inside of your body. It can be challenging to interpret the image. You get these blobs and shades of gray, and people get a lot of specific training, to become ultrasound technicians, and no less like a radiologist, a physician who would read it. But with the advent of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, you can actually dissect out that picture and have the machine tell you what it is if you taught it correctly. There's a lot of work that goes into training these things. It's not trivial. But this tool is called the Butterfly, and essentially it is a probe that interacts with a smartphone, and the software package allows the image to be interpreted, and even better, it allows the tool to direct the person so you can be your own ultrasound technician. It can tell you when you get the image right, and then tells you how to hold it. So it can then produce a diagnostic quality image, and the other algorithms, which are all the math supported by the science, that says, how do I interpret that image, starts to tell you, well, what's the size of the bladder? And is the bladder full of urine, or is the bladder empty? And those can be very important for space flight. We won't go into detail on that one, but that's the sort of thing that helps us focus. But this is small, but not small enough. So now we want to miniaturize ultrasound, and sometimes we actually want to have you wear the ultrasound while you're doing activity. So people have now, these are scientists who are in academic labs who are supported by NASA, NIH, the National Science Foundation. This is the sort of work that goes on every day that people like me try to find those folks building really cool solutions. So if you can stick it on and then it can Bluetooth or remotely project the data, we can get it while someone is out walking around in a DVA suit from a NASA perspective. But maybe this is someone who goes home from the ICU and they have to have their heart monitored or a kidney monitored. Well, you can get that data dropped different periodically. You could have the AI/ML evaluated, and then if there's a red flag, like if something's wrong, it shoots a message and throws it over to the medical side and says, this person's either good or this is an emergency, you gotta do something about it. So that's how we're trying to close the loop on medical care. That's forced, we're forced to do this for spaceflight because it's so hard, and then we can deliver back a version of it in collaboration with all these people that make it better on Earth. Also cheaper and more accessible. So a couple different examples of real life today. The bio button from IntelliSense is, and this is like a big deal for the medical world, it's FDA approved, meaning it's been through very rigorous testing. I should have brought my version with you. I have a couple of them at home. They're like the size of a quarter, and the profile is about 2 or 3 quarters thick, and you wear it on your chest. It measures a variety of biomedical, signals your body's putting out, like heart rate, but actually, a deep look at the heart rate, how much you're breathing, what's your body temperature. So when people go home from the ICU, they go home with this device, and this is another one that can alert the medical people when someone is home recovering if they're going back toward a more direction of being more sick, away from healing, and allow people to take action much more quickly than waiting for them to get bad symptoms. So we're starting to use this in spaceflight and testing it so that we can get medical monitoring on people without wearing a bunch of probes and wires and having a lot of inconvenient things. The other one is blood collection. Normally you think about having to drive to LabCorp or Quest, people use a needle, they're gonna put a, poke into your vein and take a vial of blood. Well, not everybody has a car. Not everybody, just like astronauts, can't get to LabCorp or Quest. Well, this device uses what's called microneedles. You put it in the upper part of your arm and it can draw blood out. That's very high quality. And then we can take that little vial of blood and do analysis on it in another machine. So this is one where you become much more independent than from having to drive places. You could actually, and during COVID, they mailed these home to people so that they could use and collect their blood. And then there's ingredients inside the tube that allows it to be stabilized. They send it back to the lab where the research or the medicine is going on, and they can evaluate it there. So now the person got medical care even though they didn't have a car or couldn't be transported. So this is how you start to break down some barriers. And again, ton of science behind this, not only in the hardware you see, but the science and the knowledge that allows us to say we believe the data coming out of this action. Some other really cool stuff that is no longer the future, it's the present, are called tissue chips. And when we talk about, we can actually use a person's cells, put them in a chip that allows the cells to grow in 3 dimensions and multicellular layers and replicate the function of a tissue or an organ. So we get a little snapshot of you on a silicone chip, and then we can expose that chip to things you might get exposed to see how you would react. And so we can start to test things before, and this is one way they do drug testing to know that it would be safe for you to take the drug. And it's cut way back on the problems we've seen with drugs that have adverse events with people. So this prediction ability is becoming more and more common, and it's actually, from the FDA, is required part of any study on a new drug that you build these chips and show that actually in human cells, tissues, and organs, your drug is safe enough to use. Other aspects of science that are really interesting, and this one is like multi-dimensional. This lab at UC Davis, Karen McDonald, is one of my favorite examples of what's called engineering biology. Karen is able to use a plant virus to affect a plant leaf and help those cells make an active pharmaceutical ingredient in the leaf of a plant. What's so interesting about this, we used to have to, when we were talking about engineering biology in this world of plants, they would have to do the gene, what's called gene editing at the seed level. So the whole plant would be dedicated, say, to making something, whatever you directed it to make. In this case, you've now directed it only to the leaf of the plant. So you could still eat the rest of the plant if this was the case, and just use the leaf. And in this case, she still has to purify the contents of the leaf to extract the active ingredient. But in the future, what we've asked her is, if we can control the amount you actually, it's called transfection, all the instructions you put into the leaf, then we would know the concentration of the active ingredient in the leaf, and you would just eat the leaf. So in the world of plant life, we're using a plant virus that can't infect people to affect the leaf of a plant that can create a pharmaceutical ingredient that then can be quantified and consumed by someone. And the ideas, and this is actually supported by the military as well as NASA, because when people go out in the field, you could take small plants with you, or actually a vial of things that have plant cells, and direct them to create this active ingredient. So you wouldn't have to take a pharmacy with you. You wouldn't have to pack pills or vials of liquids. And we wouldn't always have to pre-predict which drugs we needed. And that's why it's so friendly for spaceflight, that we can give the instructions in a software sense of the type of DNA we would transfect, the order of the A, T, C's, and G's. You can make them happen and give the instructions later when we figure out what the disease is or what the condition is we need to treat. So these are all amazing options that science brings us. And the work I did at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, it was a really cool project, which was we asked people, we wanted to take science fiction and make it science fact. And I think this is where when China talked about being curious, if you think of it, it is possible. Like, there will be barriers, there will be challenges, there will be hard work. But if you really believe it, you can make it happen. There are many, many people out there to support you. You find your colleagues along the way. You find people who are equally passionate about the challenge that you're trying to solve, and they're going to join you on this journey. And this was another cool version of creating a capability, kind of, for those of you, and I know this is a younger group, Star Trek, with the tricorder, where we got to scan you and know what was going on. And now they've turned it into a small patch, and there is even a group, they call it a tattoo, and it is not only able to sense things that are going on with you, like body temperature from stress or infection, but it's then able to respond because there are capabilities embedded in the sticker. You know, in terms of, it might have acetaminophen in it, or it might have steroids in it, and they were all like nanoparticle size. So really interesting stuff going on at Caltech. So on every slide I've had like a variety of institutions that have been involved, and the Tasso device that collected blood, and the biointellisensor companies who actually partnered with academia before they became a business. So I think it's really important to step back sometimes and say, it really does start here. It starts in high school, it starts with an experience, it starts with a passion or an idea, and the possibilities are really limitless. There will be challenges, there'll be hard times, there'll be hard classes, there'll be uncooperative people, and you know what? It's okay. Take a breath and find your path around the problem, and find your allies, for sure. So congratulations for being here tonight. I think the work you've done is just stellar, and I look forward to meeting you again, possibly interviewing for your job in a couple of years, or an internship. We'd love to have you. So I'd like a round of applause for you guys. Thank you.